Welcome to the deep dive. We sift through all the noise and bring you the coolest stuff we find.
That's right.
Today, we're going deep into the heart.
Ooh.
You gave us this physiology handout from Dr. Rasha Eldeeb,
Okay.
and it's about how our hearts beat, the electrical and mechanical stuff.
Cool.
So it's going to be a wild ride.
Looking forward to it.
It's one of the most important parts of our bodies.
Absolutely.
Have you ever thought about how your heart knows when to beat?
Yeah, it's pretty mind-blowing when you think about it.
It's not magic. It's an electrical system.
Wow.
And it's not like just an on or off switch. It's like this super precise dance of ions and charges. And that makes sure every beat is perfect, like timed right and strong enough to move all your blood.
Right.
Okay, let's get into it.
Okay.
Dr. Eldeeb starts with action potential.
Okay.
It's a bit technical, but basically every time your heart beats, there's this super fast change in electrical charge.
Right.
It goes across the cell membrane of your heart muscle fibers, and that's what makes the muscle contract.
Yeah, that change in charge is the action potential.
So that's what makes your heart pump.
It's the driving force behind every beat.
So Dr. Eldeeb says there's a big difference between action potential in heart muscle versus skeletal muscle.
Okay.
And during the first phase, this electrical surge thing, potassium outflow is actually reduced in heart muscle
Oh,
compared to skeletal muscle.
interesting.
Why does that matter?
Well, that difference is huge, actually,
Okay,
because it makes this special action potential just for the heart.
gotcha.
And it leads to what we call the plateau phase,
Okay.
which is a special thing about how the heart muscle contracts.
So what is it about this plateau phase that's so important?
Well, the plateau phase gives the heart enough time
Okay.
to contract fully, like effectively.
So it's like taking its time to make sure it squeezes hard enough to push the blood out?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Without it, your heartbeats would be super weak.
Right.
And your heart wouldn't be able to pump blood around your body very well.
Right.
Think about it. If your heart just twitched instead of a long squeeze, your blood pressure would be all over the place.
Yeah, chaos.
Yeah.
So this plateau phase is like a built-in thing to make sure your heart's always pumping strong.
Yes, exactly.
Like every beat.
And you know, it's really cool. This electrical activity isn't just happening on its own.
Uh-huh.
It's connected to the heart's mechanical action.
Oh, okay.
You know, the actual squeezing and pumping.
That's super interesting.
Yeah.
So Dr. Eldeeb mentions this thing, cardiac systole, which is just a fancy word for contraction.
Right.
It starts right after the first electrical surge,
Uh-huh.
and it hits its peak at the end of that plateau phase.
Right.
Then we've got diastole, which is relaxation.
Yeah.
And that happens at the same time as the last part of the electrical reset.
Mm-hmm.
So it's timed perfectly, like a dance.
Like a choreographed dance.
Yeah.
And that timing is critical for the heart to work as a good pump.
That makes sense.
What do you think would happen if your heart contracted before the ventricles were full of blood?
Well, I guess it wouldn't be able to pump out enough blood.
Exactly.
Right.
And if it didn't relax fully after each contraction, there would be time to refill.
Wow, so it's like this perfect back and forth.
Yeah. This synchronization is what makes it work so well.
It's crazy how much is going on to keep our hearts beating like they should.
I know, right?
Dr. Eldeeb talks about these 4 properties that give heart muscle its superpowers.
Okay.
We'll get into those after this.
Sounds good.
Welcome back to the deep dive. Before, we were talking about how the heart's electrical and mechanical actions are in sync so it can pump blood properly. Now let's get to these 4 key properties that Dr. Eldeeb calls superpowers.
Okay.
They give cardiac muscle, like its mojo,
Right.
excitability, rhythmicity, contractility, and conductivity.
Okay.
Each one keeps your heart strong.
Yeah, they all have a super important role.
We'll start with excitability.
Good one. Excitability is all about how the heart responds to an electrical stimulus.
Okay.
And then it generates that action potential, which makes it contract.
So it's like, how sensitive is the heart muscle to these electrical signals?
Exactly. And here's where it gets cool. Cardiac muscle is in this sweet spot when it comes to excitability.
Okay.
It's more excitable than smooth muscle,
Uh-huh.
but less than skeletal muscle.
Oh, okay.
Why do you think that's important?
Well, if it was as excitable as skeletal muscle, wouldn't your heart be contracting all the time?
You got it.
Non-stop.
And maybe even like randomly.
Yeah, I
It's
know.
all about balance.
Okay.
It has to be responsive enough to make a good, strong heartbeat,
Right.
but not so much that it goes crazy.
So finding that sweet spot between being responsive and controlled.
Exactly. And that's where these refractory periods come in. It's like a cool down
Okay.
for the heart muscle.
Okay.
During this absolute refractory period, the heart muscle can't respond to anything,
Oh, wow.
no matter what.
Uh,
It's like a safety thing that keeps the heart from getting overstimulated
Okay.
and getting stuck being contracted.
Right, because that would be bad.
That'd be really bad, like
Yeah.
disastrous,
Yeah.
like a built-in circuit breaker.
Yeah, I get it.
And then you have the relative refractory period. The heart muscle is only kind of responsive then.
Okay.
You need a stronger than usual stimulus to make it contract. And it'll be a weaker contraction too.
Interesting.
And this is important because it helps the heart adjust its rate and how strong it contracts.
So it can, like, keep up with what your body needs.
Exactly. Like when you exercise,
Mhm.
your sympathetic nervous system kicks in,
Uh-huh.
releases adrenaline,
Okay.
and that makes those refractory periods shorter.
So your heart can beat faster then?
Exactly. To get more blood pumping.
Oh, to keep up with you needing more oxygen.
Exactly.
So your heart's like fine-tuning how responsive it is.
Yeah. To match what your body needs at that moment.
That's so cool.
Another example of how adaptable the heart is.
I know. Okay, next superpower, rhythmicity.
Right.
This is how the heart beats regularly on its own without any help.
Right.
Like it has an internal drummer that never misses a beat.
I like that. And the key to that is pacemaker cells.
Mm.
They're mainly in the sinoatrial node,
Uh-huh.
or NN.
Okay.
Think of it as the conductor,
Oh, okay.
setting the tempo for the whole heart muscle orchestra.
So the SAN is like the heart's own pacemaker.
Exactly. But the SAN isn't the only place it can start a beat.
Really?
Yeah, other parts can too,
Mm-hmm.
like the AV node
Mm-hmm.
and the Purkinje fibers.
Oh, okay.
But they have a slower rhythm naturally. So the SAN is usually the one setting the pace.
Okay.
But if it messes up, the AV node takes over.
Oh, like a backup.
Yeah. And if both fail, the Purkinje fibers are the last resort.
Wow, so it's like this multi-layered system.
Yeah, a backup system to make sure the heart keeps beating no matter what.
That's pretty amazing.
Now, this pacemaker potential is a gradual increase in electrical charge that triggers the heartbeat.
Right.
And how it actually happens is super interesting. Unlike nerves that use sodium influx for depolarization, pacemaker cells use calcium influx.
Oh, so calcium is involved here too.
Big time.
Interesting.
Calcium is essential for muscles to contract. Not just the heart, but everywhere.
Gotcha.
In pacemaker cells, this slow calcium influx, little by little, increases the cell's charge
Huh.
until it hits a threshold.
Okay.
And that triggers a rapid depolarization, which starts the heartbeat.
So like a slow buildup of energy and then boom.
You got it.
Yeah.
And just like with excitability, all sorts of things can mess with this rhythmicity.
Like what?
Your nervous system,
Okay.
temperature,
Uh-huh.
even some medications.
Wow.
They can all affect your heart rate.
It's amazing how complex all of this is.
I know, right?
Just to keep our hearts beating normally, we talked about electrical signals, how the heart sets its own rhythm.
Yeah.
But what about how strong the heartbeat actually is? That's contractility, right?
Exactly. Contractility is how strong the heart muscle contracts each time. It's all about the power the heart uses to push blood through your system.
So like it's muscle power.
Precisely.
Mm.
And it's a cool process connected to that electrical activity. Remember the sliding filament model?
Vaguely.
That's where the action's happening,
Mhm.
at the microscopic level.
Okay.
Imagine your heart muscle cells as tiny, organized units called sarcomeres.
Okay.
Each one has thick filaments made of myosin and thin filaments made of actin.
Like a little world inside each cell.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, here's the cool part. The myosin filaments have these heads.
Okay.
They want to grab the actin and pull,
Uh-huh.
like a microscopic tug of war.
Okay.
That's what makes the contraction force. But there's a catch. The myosin heads can't just grab onto actin whenever.
Okay.
They need a signal, like a key, to unlock it.
Okay.
And that key is calcium.
Calcium keeps coming up.
I know, right?
Like it's the main character.
When calcium binds to this protein called troponin on the actin, it makes another protein, tropomyosin shift. And that exposes the binding sites for those myosin heads.
So the calcium's like a backstage pass.
Haha, exactly. It gives myosin access to actin.
Gotcha.
Once myosin can bind to actin, those heads start pulling, the filaments slide past each other,
Okay.
and that makes the force of the contraction.
Wow, a whole chain reaction, all from a tiny calcium signal.
Exactly.
Okay.
And here's another cool thing. Cardiac muscle gets its calcium from two places.
Okay.
The sarcoplasmic reticulum, which is inside the muscle cell,
Uh-huh.
and the fluid outside the cell.
Oh, so two sources.
Yes, which gives it more control over how strong the contraction is.
Like having two gas tanks.
That's a great way to put it.
So it has more flexibility with how much power it uses.
Exactly. Now, the process of how that action potential triggers this calcium-driven contraction is called excitation-contraction coupling.
Okay.
Basically, the action potential goes deep inside the muscle cell
Uh-huh.
through these tunnels called T-tubules.
Okay.
That triggers the release of calcium from the sarcoplasmic reticulum.
So it's like a communication system inside the cell.
Exactly. Relaying the signal from the surface to the inside.
That's wild.
Once the calcium is released,
Yeah.
it binds to troponin,
Okay.
sets off the sliding filaments, and boom, contraction.
And then to relax.
To relax, all that calcium has to be pumped back into the sarcoplasmic reticulum
Yeah.
and also out of the cell so the muscle fibers can relax.
So calcium is like the main dancer.
Uh-huh, exactly.
Yeah.
It's a carefully choreographed dance.
But the heart doesn't beat with the same force all the time.
Right.
It has to change, like when we exercise or when we're resting.
Exactly.
So what affects contractility? How it adjusts the strength of each beat?
Great question. Your nervous system is one of the big players. Remember how we talked about the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems affecting heart rate? They also affect contractility. Sympathetic stimulation, like when we're excited or exercising, makes contractility stronger.
Okay.
Gives your heart more power. It's called a positive inotropic effect.
Like an adrenaline boost for the heart. What about parasympathetic? Does that make it stronger too?
Actually, the parasympathetic system does the opposite. Decreases contractility,
Oh.
but mainly in the atria, not so much in the ventricles.
Okay.
That's important because the ventricles are the main pumpers, sending blood out to the body.
Right.
So it's like the parasympathetic system is tapping the brakes,
Okay.
mostly on the atria,
Uh-huh.
while the ventricles keep pumping hard.
Gotcha. So they're not all affected the same way.
Exactly. And here's something else. Your heart rate can also affect contractility. A faster heart rate actually makes it contract harder.
Wait, so the heart is more powerful when it beats faster. Why is that?
It does seem a bit weird,
Yeah.
but it's all about how the heart muscle handles calcium. When your heart rate goes up, there's less time to get that calcium pumped out between beats.
Oh, okay.
So there's more calcium inside the cell, which means stronger contractions.
So it's like beating faster makes it even stronger.
It's a positive feedback loop.
Oh, cool.
A faster rate makes contractions stronger,
Okay.
which pumps blood more efficiently.
That's so cool.
And then we have the Frank Starling law.
Okay.
It's how the heart adjusts its contraction force based on how much blood is in the chambers. Basically, the more the heart muscle stretches, the stronger the next contraction will be.
So the more blood comes in, the harder it squeezes.
Exactly. It's like a built-in way to self-regulate.
So it can handle different amounts of blood flow.
Yes, depending on your activity and other things.
Wow, it's like the heart knows exactly how much force it needs.
You got it. To
Yeah.
keep everything balanced.
And of course, we can't forget medications.
Right.
Some drugs can make contractility stronger, some weaker.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which is super important for treating different heart problems.
So it's like a toolkit for adjusting the heart power.
That's a good way to think about it.
Mm-hmm.
But these medications have to be used carefully.
Right, because they can have side effects too.
Right. Always talk to a doctor before taking any heart meds.
Definitely. Okay, so we talked about excitability, rhythmicity, and contractility.
Right.
That leaves conductivity. It sounds like communication within the heart.
You got it. Conductivity is how the heart moves those electrical impulses through the muscle,
Okay.
so the chambers contract in the right order.
So the heart has its own wiring system?
Exactly. Just like with any electrical system, speed and timing are everything.
Right.
Different parts of the heart conduct impulses at different speeds.
That makes sense.
So the atria contract first, then the ventricles.
Uh-huh.
That's what makes that lub-dub sound.
It's like a relay race for an electrical signal.
Exactly.
What?
And passing the baton is super important.
Right.
Dr. Eldeeb talks about these special pathways in the heart. Each one has a job to do.
Okay, break it down for me. Internodal pathways, the AV node, Purkinje fibers. Sounds kind of complicated.
It is, but it works really well.
Okay.
Those internodal pathways are like the first runners. Carrying the impulse from the sinoatrial node, that's the heart's main pacemaker, to the atrioventricular node, or AV node.
Okay, and the AV node, that's where things get interesting.
You got it. The AV node is like a pause in the race. It slows down the electrical impulse for a tiny bit
Oh, okay.
before sending it to the ventricles. That pause is super important.
Why?
It gives the atria time to squeeze all their blood into the ventricles
Oh.
before the ventricles contract. What do you think would happen if it didn't pause?
Wouldn't the ventricles start contracting before they were full,
Exactly.
so they wouldn't pump out as much blood?
Yeah, like filling a water balloon while someone's squeezing it.
Right, you wouldn't get much water in.
Exactly. That AV node delay makes the heart's pumping as efficient as possible.
That tiny delay makes a big difference.
Mm.
And then the Purkinje fibers are the last runners?
Yes, they get the signal from the AV node,
Okay.
and they send it through the ventricles really fast.
Uh-huh.
So they all contract at almost the same time.
Oh, so it's a synchronized squeeze.
Exactly, to get that strong push of blood out to the body.
Wow. So it's all about timing, making sure everything happens in the right order with the right amount of force.
You got it. It's all connected.
Dr. Eldeeb said different heart tissues have different conduction velocities.
Right.
Meaning how fast they send the electrical impulse?
Exactly. The Purkinje fibers are the fastest, and the AV node is the slowest, like you talked about. Why do you think those speeds are different?
I guess the slower speed through the AV node is what makes that important delay.
Right.
And the fast speed in the Purkinje fibers make sure the ventricles contract strong and together.
Exactly, like a perfectly timed dance. So we talked about how the nervous system can affect heart rate and contractility.
Yeah.
But can it also change conductivity? Like the speed of the electrical impulses?
I don't know, can it?
It sure can. Your nervous system is always tweaking things,
Oh, wow.
including conductivity. Sympathetic stimulation, like your fight or flight response, speeds it up.
Yeah.
Parasympathetic, your rest and digest, slows it down.
It's amazing how it's all connected like that. Now, what about those abnormalities that Dr. Eldeeb mentions? Extrasystole, flutter, fibrillation, heart block.
Right.
What are those and why are they bad?
Basically, they mess up the heart's normal rhythm.
Okay.
Extrasystole is like a premature beat, like a hiccup.
Okay.
It can happen from things like stress or too much caffeine. Usually it's not a big deal,
Right.
but it can be kind of freaky.
I've definitely felt those before.
Then there's flutter and fibrillation.
Okay.
Those are more serious.
Okay.
The atria or ventricles beat super fast and irregular,
Oh.
which messes with blood flow and can even be life-threatening if it's really bad.
Wow.
Heart block is when the electrical impulse is slowed down or blocked on its way from the atria to the ventricles.
Okay.
That makes your heart rate slow down. Sometimes people need a pacemaker to keep their heart beating right.
Wow. So much can go wrong if this electrical system gets messed up.
It really shows how important it is to understand how our hearts work.
And to take good care of them.
Absolutely. The heart is an amazing organ. It's a perfect example of how powerful and elegant biology can be.
That's a great way to put it.
Knowing how complex it is and how tough it is the first step to keeping it healthy.
Well said. We went deep into the electrical and mechanical parts of the heart today.
We did.
I hope our listener has a better understanding of this vital organ now.
Me too. It was a fascinating journey.
And how amazing it is that it keeps us going.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the heart's electric symphony.
Thanks for having me.
Keep those brains buzzing and those hearts pumping.